How you doing, guys? Welcome back to another update. In this one, I'm going to be going through each of the teams and we're looking at their schedule for the year, which teams are going to have the easiest, which teams are going to have the hardest, and then we'll at the end we'll go through every team's first 5 games. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea of the types of players you might want to start with. If you're looking at a team that has an easier schedule, then maybe their outside backs are someone that you want to be looking at a little bit heavily compared to the team that has the harder draw at the start, especially those wingers and centers that really rely on tries. And then it could be, if your team has a bad draw, they might be coming up against some good teams. And then if there's someone that tackles a lot, that's going to be heaps better for them and their point scoring. So we're going to start with the Newcastle Knights, who, according to the stats, have the best schedule. So they've got 10 teams against the top 8, 14 against the bottom 8, which is really cool. Only 5 games against the top 4 teams across the 26-round season. So really awesome for them. We're going to go through each of these ones first, guys, and then we'll jump into their first 5 games as we go along. But guys like Bradman Best, Mitchell Pearce, Kurt Mann, these types of guys are going to be creating a lot more try assists, scoring a lot more tries. Tex Hoy at the start of the season we'll have a look at in terms of their first 5 games. But these types of players are going to be really helpful in a team like the Knights. If they're scoring really well and doing really well, they're not going to be tackling as much. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in those first 5 games. Is that worse for Brayley, Watson, these type of players? So we'll have a look at that as we come along. But the Cowboys come in a second, so for them, an easy draw means there'll be some closer games, which could be good for, it's going to be good for a tackling player anyway. With Cowboys not going to be as good, but it is going to help the guys like Valentine Holmes, Drinkwater, Michael Morgan, these types of players going through the Cowboys team, which will be great. Canberra Raiders, so a team that's going to be in the top 8. So it becomes very even from here. 12 against the top 8, 12 against the bottom 8. So again, we'll have a look at the teams that they play in the first 5 rounds. But when you look at the teams they play twice, you've got Sharks, Seagulls, Knights, who are okay, Warriors, the Dragons. So half of those teams are bottom dweller teams. Sharks will be a little bit more through the middle, but these types of players in the outside backs, it depends what Tomoko kind of gets, but even Croker at a discounted price. But Jack White and these types of guys are going to get some good stats through the first part of the season, especially, and that's what a lot of people are going to be focusing on, that first sort of 5 games, especially with the fact that we all like to trade a lot, we all like to rage trade. So if players aren't doing as well at the start, then we're less likely to be able to hold them through the entire season. So we want those guys that are going to have a fast start, and you hope that they make you a bunch of money, score really good points for you, and then you can move them on if they're not going to be a keeper. The Cronulla Sharks come into 4th, which is really cool. But again, when you look at it, it's 11 against the top 8, 13 against the bottom 8. It's not a big discrepancy. Half the teams against either, and you can see that for the majority of them. So not going to be too important coming into it. I said unless there's a bunch of guys that you really want in this team that are going to be in the outside backs that are going to score really well, then not going to be too important. We'll skip a bunch of the middle ones and head to the back end. So the Brisbane Broncos have the 16th, so being the hardest. So 15 teams against top 8, 9 against the bottom 8. So got big tacklers like your Matt Lodge, Jake Turpin. You're talking about Payne Haas. You're talking about Carrigan, TPJ. All their big forwards are going to do a lot of tackling work, and we'll have a look at guys like Tessie New and Osako in their first 5 games, because they're going to be the really important ones for us in those first 5. But just thinking about that when you're creating your squad as well. Obviously, things like the bye schedule is going to be important as well, with a bunch of with all the Origin guys missing 2 games, and then depending on which one of your players has a bye in the first round or that second round is something that plays a factor as well. Obviously, the most important thing is going to be, is this person going to score well? Is this person going to make money? Are they getting the correct minutes? But these are all 5 to 10% factors in deciding that first team as well. So you've got the Bulldogs as well. So a bunch of the forwards are going to be great in this team. Not that there's too many to think about. Just depend what happens with like Corey Waddell and these types of players. Parramatta Eels, you got forwards like Madison, Nathan Brown. These kind of guys have been doing a lot of hard work against some of the harder teams. But again, you see here it's 12 and 12, so they're fairly even across the board. But let's move on to each individual side and get a nice feel for who they're up against. So Broncos come up against the Eels, the Titans, the Dogs, the Storm, and the Bunnies in the first 5 rounds. So some really hard teams, and this is going to be very interesting for those players like Asako and Tessinu. Are they going to be able to score well and get a lot of tries and try assists and tackle busts against these types of teams? Eels are going to be great. Titans are going to be in the top 8 this year. Dogs are probably the only one that's going to be in the back end of the draw, with Storm and Bunnies, and then you can even go to Penrith after that in round 6. So really interesting for these guys. I'd expect your Lodgers and stuff to do really well in these first bunch of games with the other team having a lot of ball and attacking a lot. But Broncos have a chance to get better, and we can always leave that up to them, and hopefully they do. But that is a fairly tough draw, which aligns with what we're talking about before. Canberra Raiders, we'll slide it on down. We've got the Tigers, the Sharks, the Warriors, the Titans, and the Panthers. So the first 3 games are really, really cool for the Raiders. So if you've got some attacking players from the Raiders, and they should be scoring really well in those first 3 games, and then it gets a bit harder with the Titans, Penrith, and the Eels before a Cowboys game there. So something interesting to think about with them. The forwards probably won't score as well in terms of the base stats. You'd expect a few more tries in these games, a little, slowing down the rolling 80-minute timer, and these are the types of games where you see the backs really dominate. And we'll slide along to the Bulldogs. We've got the Knights, Panthers, Broncos, Souths, and Storms. So another really hard draw, as we saw with the second hardest one there. So your outside backs should have a little bit of an issue. Think of someone like Hopewade, Nick Kotrick, these kind of guys. They'll be really banking on getting their tackle busts and tackles up to give you a nice consistent score there. But yeah, moving on to the Sharks. They've got the Dragons, Raiders, Eels, Cowboys, and Roosters. So a couple of decent games in there to start off with. They were one of the teams that had an easier stretch, but you can see it should be an easier game first up with the Dragons, and then a few harder ones before Cowboys in round 4. So expect this to be a fairly neutral for your outside backs. Sliding on down, Titans. All right, we got Warriors, Broncos, Cowboys. Wow, that's a lovely 3-starter. Guys like this guy, AJ Brimson. You've got Brian Kelly. These type of guys that are going to be really interesting in those first few rounds, given the fact that they're coming up against 3 easier teams, definitely bottom 8 teams. I'll be going out there and saying, but these type of guys should be scoring really well in those first few games. So that's really interesting there. You got Raiders, who are also a decent team, but then Knights and Seagulls in round 5 and 6. So Titans are really, really cool for that first 5 games. So I'd be thinking about loading up a little bit on those type of plays. If you're on the fence with them, I'd suggest to pick them now based on that. Manly, you're going to struggle in general, is my thoughts. But you got Roosters, South as your first 2. Panthers in round 4. You got Dragons and Warriors 3 and 5. So again, outside backs are going to struggle a little bit in this side this year. I'm tipping them to be similar to what the Titans were at the start of last year, where not a lot happening in those first few rounds. So I'd be wary if you're picking guys in the backs for Manly. Moving on to the Storm. All right, South, Eels, Panthers, Broncos, and Dogs. So after the first 3 games, they've got a couple of easier ones in the Broncos and the Dogs, but a Storm team's going to be good in general. So you'd expect some back and forth against these good teams and some decent scores. You're looking something like a 24-22, 24-20 against the Bunnies, for example, and similar with a couple of the other teams there. So Storm, I wouldn't be too worried. I said they're going to be a really good team in themselves, so they are going to put on points naturally anyway. So let's move on from them. Knights spoke about having the best draw from the start, and you can see that Dogs, Warriors, Tigers, Dragons, and then Titans, followed by Sharks. So really cool. Be nice if Ponga was playing. I think a lot of people will put him in their team for that kind of start. But someone like Tex Hoy, this is really helpful for them, given that he's probably going to be getting 3 to 4 rounds. This type of draw at the start is going to be really helpful. He should be able to score well in that, given the fact that there's a chance he might kick some goals too. Who knows on that one. But yeah, someone like him, Bradman Best, these kind of guys I was talking about should do really well in this start of the season. Cowboys, we got Panthers, and then a fair few easier games. So some outside backs for Cowboys should do okay with some more high-scoring games. I'd be tipping against the Dragons, the Sharks, the Tigers, these types of teams. Maybe even the Titans as well, but they should be getting smashed in round 1 against the Panthers. That's my call. So just think about that when you're bringing in the Cowboys, guys. The Eels come up next. We've got the Broncos, Storm, the Sharks, Tigers, and the Dragons. So a fairly decent draw again if you're thinking about guys like Tom Opacek. Gutho should be able to get some decent scores. You got Dylan Brown, Mitch Moses, these types of guys who should be able to do well in attack against these types of teams. Guys like Nathan Brown and Madison, they might be able to score some tries in this period, but I'd expect their tackles to be a little bit lower against some of the worst teams, especially like a Broncos, Tigers, and a Dragons, but should be up a bit against a Sharks or a Storm. So something to think about there. We move on to the Panthers. They got the Cowboys and the Dogs. The first two games should be a lot of points if you're thinking about some outside backs. Momorowski, Luai, Nathan Cleary, these types of guys. Cleary usually plays great against the good teams anyway, so that doesn't matter. But then you got Manly around 4. So outside backs are going to be really good against these types of players, types of teams. Dylan Edwards, the guys you want to be thinking about there. Alrighty, moving on to the Bunnies, a team that's going to be really good this year. They start off with the Storm, so a tough game. Then we have Manly, so there's going to be some contrast. People are thinking about picking Latrell. How's he going to go against the Storm? I doubt he's going to score as well as he did the other day in the trial. Manly, you might go crazy. These first 3 games, I could expect a 25, a 70, and a 25, and then a couple of 50s again. So if you're thinking about bringing in Latrell, be prepared for the roller coaster that's probably going to happen when you have him. But he's based, I think, at his floor. I don't see him getting any cheaper than in the 400Ks. So if you attempted to bring him in, I'd suggest doing it early. If not after round 1, maybe round 2. But it's much easier to start with these types of players. Move on to the Dragons. We're almost there, guys. Sharks, Cowboys, Manly, Knights, and Eels. So outside backs for the Dragons, if Bird might be able to do a little bit better. You got Lomax as the gun. Max Fagai might be able to get a chance. Dufty should run right a little bit in the first few. So these types of players I'd be interested in selecting to my side, especially from a draft perspective as well. These types of guys that can do well at the start, and then you can move them on or try and trade them to some other players in your draft. If they're not, let's just say they're not as smart as you or haven't followed this video, for example, you might be able to trade them on and follow the sequence of easier teams to play against. All right, Sydney Roosters. Got Manly, Tigers, Bunnies, Warriors, and Sharks. So a fairly solid draw for them. So again, those guys in the outside backs, even though it's a little bit more settled, this team, in terms of options, you got guys like Tedesco who should go crazy against the Eagles and the Tigers, given the fact they shouldn't be as good. Decent game against the Bunnies before Warriors and the Sharks. So I'd expect Tedesco to start fairly well against a few easier teams there. And then the Warriors to round it out. So the Titans, the Knights, the Raiders, Roosters, and Manly. It's not a crazy easy one, or they're fairly well in the placed in the middle in terms of how easy their draw is. But guys like Rogers should do really well, and as per normally, it doesn't really matter who he plays against. And then I think the forwards in this one, the forwards should have a good battle against the Titans. So there should be a whole bunch of tackling and a big battle, as I said, in through the middle with them running hard and getting points through meters and tackle busts there and offloads. But Knights should be decent, Raiders should be decent, Roosters. So the middle forwards I expect to do well for the Warriors. It's going to be based on what kind of minutes they're going to end up getting. But there you go. And we got the West Tigers to finish with the Raiders, the Roosters, the Knights, Eels, and the Cowboys. So a fairly tough draw for them to start. So their outside backs are going to be an interesting one to think about. Someone like James Roberts, how will he go against some of these better teams? All these things play a decent part. Dane Laurie, will he be able to go well against these teams and not against someone like the Manly Sea Eagles? So yeah, really interesting, guys. I hope this helps. As I said, it's probably going to be like a 5% decision in your team when you're selecting it, but these things do play a factor. You can see if you go back through scores of players past and you go, oh yeah, they played against the Dragons one year, they played against the Cowboys and he got a 70 compared to when he played against the Storm and got 30, for example. So that's where you're going to see the swings. It's going to be in the outside back. So yeah, guys, let me know what you think of that one. Please hit like and subscribe if you're enjoying this. Let's keep building this community, and I can't wait for round 1. It's less than a couple of weeks away now, so good luck out there. See ya.